Hello and welcome to the DevDC podcast. My name is Shay Reardon, and today we have Jared Smith. Jared has been a software development and open source evangelist for 25 years. And Jared's actually worked at places like Red Hat, the Endurance International Group, and Capital One, and even published a book on programming languages and created what we'll see here, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Software Developers, which we're obviously going to cover today. And yeah, thanks for being on this morning, Jared.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Great. Not happy to have you. So the DevDC podcast is geared towards the growth and development of engineers. And Jared, you've been putting content out to help engineers for quite some time. Curious what fuels you doing that?
A couple of things. I think I was very lucky and early on in my career to have a couple of great mentors who really kind of taught me the ropes and taught me some skills that have really helped me along. And then I spent part of my career doing technical training. And so I got to see students come through some of my classes and start out with maybe a rudimentary knowledge of the technical material, and then really have those eureka moments where they're like, aha, now I can finally go do something with these skills that I've learned. And so for me, that's part of what drives that. I've also been very passionate about open source communities, and open source is all about sharing and helping people bootstrap themselves to where they can take code and go do interesting things with it, and then showcase what work they've done. So I don't know, that all just kind of rolls into why I do what I do.
Nice. That's good that you take a genuine interest in helping folks out, and seems like it is a passion of yours.
It really is.
Would love to hear like your story wherever you want it to begin.
Sure. I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, and when I say small town, I mean an hour from the nearest stoplight kind of small town in Wyoming. But my dad knew that computers were going to be the big thing, and so he bought a little Commodore 64, and that was really my start in the computer age. And
how did he know that? That's a long time ago. Was he in tech also?
He was not in tech. He was in finance, but
okay.
But computers were starting to come into accounting and bookkeeping and that sort of thing, and so he knew that that was going to be the cool thing. So we bought this Commodore 64, but we bought it without a tape drive, or without even a cassette drive for the first little while that we had it. So I would turn on the computer, I could type in a program in BASIC, I could run that program, but if I turned off the computer, all the memory was gone.
Storage was gone. Yeah,
storage was gone. But that kind of got me started in programming and learning to kind of chart my own way and build what I wanted to build for computers. And eventually we got a floppy drive, and we got a 300 baud modem, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Did you add that all on yourself, or were you?
Oh yeah.
Oh, nice. Interesting.
And then moved on to the Commodore 128, which was kind of a cool little machine that nobody really understood, because you could boot it into Commodore Basic, or you could boot it into CPM, which is kind of a precursor to DOS. And it's kind of interesting that it had these kind of dual personalities on a computer. And then I started getting into obviously the Intel 8086 and 8088 type processors, and onto modern PC hardware. But I've always done a little bit of computer hardware, a little bit of computer software. Got a degree in electrical engineering, and so I was very, very involved on the hardware side and that sort of thing. But at the same time I was going to school, I was also working in the software industry, doing software development and systems administration. So I got a lot on the software side and on the operations side as well. And then my career has been it's not been a straight path. It's been a very windy road, but winding between systems administration, software development, open source evangelism, leading software development teams, and kind of developer evangelism all rolled into one.
Nice. A lot of different things there. I'm curious how old you were when you first started, with your computer, like adding storage on the side and all that.
When I started with the Commodore 64, I was, I don't know, 6 years old, 5 years old.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Very, very young. I found that by the time I was, getting ready to leave elementary school and go on to middle school, that I knew more about computers than the teachers did, and that the teachers were pulling me out of class to come fix the computers for the other students. Just typical geek story,
Yeah. What brought you to the DC the DMV? What brought you to this area?
So when my wife and I got married, we came out here as part of our honeymoon. She has some family here in the Stafford County, Virginia area.
Okay.
In fact, we now live on a family farm here that's been in her family for a couple hundred years. And I just fell in love with the area. I love the trees. I love the outdoors. I love that we're, close enough to the beach, but close enough to the mountains, and kind of get all four seasons. And so after visiting here on our honeymoon, I just kind of fell in love with the area, and we lived other places for a few years, and then we decided that this is where we really wanted to be. And I got a job that would let me work remotely, and so we moved out here, and I've worked mostly remotely for the last 15 or 16 years.
Okay, so you're used to this.
Yeah, I'm used to this. This is old hat for me. Everybody else is figuring it out with COVID, and so it's been an opportunity for me to use a little mentorship and show people what I've learned over the last 15 or 16 years of working remotely.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's a good segue, right? We have the 7 habits of effective software developers here. Let's talk a little bit about that, why you created it, and what the content is.
Sure. I sort of created it by accident. I got asked by one of my supervisors at one of the companies I was working for. He asked me one day, just kind of out of the blue, he's like, have you been able to identify any habits or characteristics in your team of things that people that are really effective have that people who aren't effective, don't have, and I started thinking about it, and I jotted down some notes. And to kind of set a little bit of backstory, right after I got married, my parents, being very practical people, as a birthday gift, gave me a copy of Stephen Covey's book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And then they also gave me one of these Franklin planners. And so again, I'm going to date myself a little bit, but gives you an idea about the time I got married. I started reading the book and maybe got 5 pages into it and said, self-help stuff, I'm not really into that. And put a Post-it note in it and stuck it on the shelf and didn't really return to it for about another 15 or 20 years. But as my boss asked me about these habits, I started kind of forming a list, and I had maybe 5 or 6. And then a coworker of mine says, man, those sound a lot like the 7 habits that Stephen Covey has in his book. And so I thought, I guess I better go dig out the book and look and see if there's any parallels. And funny enough, they matched up almost identically. And so I did a presentation on 7 habits of highly effective software developers. And then I've kind of revamped this and redone it several times for several different presentations in various venues. That's kind of how that came about. The other thing I found very interesting about this is over the last couple of years, I finished up my MBA program. I had a leadership class as part of that, and of course, the required reading for that was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so this has been top on my mind. And so, not to put too much focus specifically on the book and the 7 habits that come out of Stephen Covey's work, but basically, it's 7 habits that lead you from being dependent to being independent to being interdependent, and then kind of sharpening the saw and improving your skills there. But to kind of mix it up, what I've done with my presentation is I've made it more, just to add a little more excitement. I want to liken it to the game of golf. Okay. I don't know how many of the listeners here have played golf. I mean, I think most people are fairly familiar with it. You hit a little white ball around a big field and curse a lot. And
the lower score, the better.
The lower the score, the better
for me, but that is the goal.
And one of the other nice things about golf is that it's not a zero-sum game. If I win, it doesn't mean you lose. It means we play together, and we're both playing against our own skills and our own handicap. Not necessarily playing directly against each other. And people of different skill levels can play together and still have a good time. So anyway, to make the presentation kind of interesting, we're going to score these things like we score golf. The lower the score, the better. Like they say, the score's made up, the points don't matter, but it's a fun way to just kind of gauge yourself and do some introspection on how are you with some of these different habits. And we'll look at some of these habits both from the perspective of being a software developer as well as the perspective of being a manager of software developers. So we'll kind of switch back and forth.
Yeah, because you've done both. Yep.
So let's start out with habit number 1. The first habit I've noticed about effective software developers is they tend to be proactive. They know when to be proactive and how to be proactive. They don't wait to be told to go test something and see if the software is actually working like it should. They don't have to be told to go fix a problem. They see a problem happen, they're being proactive and trying to respond to that. They don't wait for a disaster to happen. They communicate and go and jump in and solve problems before somebody has to tell them to go do that. With managers, especially managers of software developers, there's sometimes those hard conversations you have to have with your reports, and I find that effective software development managers have those hard conversations proactively rather than waiting for a disaster and saying, "Oh, I should have had this conversation 3 weeks ago, but we really need to fix this," or, "Hey, we need to put you on a performance plan to improve some things," or that sort of thing. So knowing when and how to be proactive with your reports is very, very important. So just again, we'll bring golf into this, and our golf score here. You start out with a score of 0. For this hole, we're going to say add 2 to your score if you have to be instructed to do every little thing, or as a manager, you're micromanaging everything that happens, with your team. That's your double bogey right there.
Right.
We'll add 1 to your score if you're waiting until a disaster happens to try restoring your backups, or try to reboot the server.
Sure.
Everybody I think in a fairly good sized organization or larger has this one server that, hey, if that server ever gets rebooted, the whole company's going to fall apart.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, give yourself a point if you see that in your organization. Kind of par for the course is just expecting every project to just work without any proactive work being done on it. And then we'll give you a birdie if you're good at giving timely advice and proactively saying, hey, it would be great if we went and did this. And we'll even give you 2 under par if if you set expectations early, you give timely feedback during a project, and you give appropriate praise once the project is done.
Mm-hmm. So Jared, I have a question. So
sure.
You started playing with computers when you're like 6, and you mentioned that one of the reasons that you're fueled to help software developers in their careers because you've had mentors. Who mentored you?
So, one my father when I was really, by the time I was in middle school and early part of high school, he was actually teaching some small computer classes in this little town I grew up in, just to help friends and neighbors.
How small is little, by the way? Because I grew up in a small town myself.
The town itself probably has 300 people.
Oh yeah, mine's way bigger than yours. I had 12,000. So
Oh yeah. Like I said, I was literally more than an hour from the closest stoplight.
Yeah.
Not to go too far down this tangent, but when I was in high school, they said I heard a statistic that said there was a Kmart within 5 miles of 85% of the U.S. population, and I was 75 miles from the nearest Kmart.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That tells you how far.
It gives you where you fall on a percentile there.
Yeah. I was the exception to the exception.
Yeah.
But then when I went off to college and started working, while I was in college, I had a really great mentor by the name of Alan, who kind of took me under his wing and taught me a lot of these skills as I was just a part-time college student working on some simulator systems. He was the one that was probably my first great mentor as far as how to do some of these sorts of things. So got to give him credit.
Was that was in Utah?
That was in Utah.
Utah, okay.
I was in northern Utah, a little town called Logan, Utah, near Utah State University.
Okay.
Both my wife and I worked for the same simulator company, and Alan was both of our bosses, and so we had a good time with Alan. But he was great at not just.
And you met your wife. That's pretty good.
I actually met my wife before then, but
okay.
She got a job there, and then I was able to weasel my way into the company as well.
Nice.
Yeah, we had a good time working together at the same company. So.
Nice.
Anyway, and then since then, I've had several other supervisors and bosses and CEOs that have been great mentors to me, both on the business side and on the side. So. All right, should we go on to number 2?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Number 2 is about planning for success.
Oh, interesting.
I find that that effective software developers plan ahead. One of the things that my good mentor Alan taught me was that if you can't say it in English, or if you can't sketch it on a napkin, you can't write it in code. And I learned this when he had a big software development project that was that got thrown on his lap, and it was kind of time sensitive. And I saw him walk into his office and pull out some sheets of paper and he started doodling on a piece of paper. And I thought, Alan, what are you doing? We got to have this program done in a few hours. Why are you doodling on paper rather than sitting down at the keyboard? And he says, here, let me show you. He says, I'm trying to work out the logic in my head or on a piece of paper here. Once I can do that, then I can write it in code. But if I'm trying to write it in code and fight, syntax errors and logic errors, well, I haven't got the logic formed out in my head, then I'm not going to be able to get this done in time. And so I ask software developers, how will you know when your program is finished? How will you know that your program's actually working as it is intended?
Yeah.
Is a program ever really finished? I mean, oftentimes you write version 1.0 of a piece of
Right.
software, and then there's things that you want to add to 1.1 or 1.2, and then eventually you get second system syndrome and you try to write 2.0 and on we go. But just sketch it out on paper first. Plan ahead for what you're trying to develop.
So this is plan for success, not just plan ahead, right? It's like plan as if it's going to go well.
Plan as if it's going to go well, but how do you know what success is?
Yeah.
So and this,
it's got to help with burnout too, right?
It does. And the other thing this helps with is, without going too far into prescribing things like test-driven development or behavior-driven development, knowing, hey, is this working or not, and how are we going to know if it's successful or not, is important as you're writing a program, because you can write those tests or those sorts of kind of guardrails around the code as you're writing it, rather than trying to do QA after the fact and without any of that along the way. So,
all right, so how do we score this? Okay, here we go.
Scoring this, +2 if you start working on a project without any plans.
Even if it's on a piece of, a napkin, that can be a plan. Even if it's
on a napkin, yeah.
Okay.
Something I read in an article this past week said it's not the plans themselves that are so important as it is the process of planning. And so, if you start a project without any planning at all, then give yourself +2, give yourself +1. If you over plan to the point of not actually getting any work done,
sure.
There is a the flip side is you can't over plan or spend so much time planning that you don't actually get any work done.
Right.
Par for the course is probably a sketch on the back of a napkin, which promptly gets thrown away, but at least you went through the planning exercise there.
Mm-hmm.
Birdie on this one is get everyone on board with a general plan before the project starts. Hey, this is what we're doing. This is the general direction we're heading in. We're not gonna plan every single little detail, but let's get everybody on board and at least start in the right direction. And then I say, 2 below par if you revisit your plan periodically along the way. You get stakeholder approval for any significant changes along the way. It's as much about planning along the way as it is planning at the beginning. You can't just plan at the beginning and then do no more planning until the very end of the project.
Mm-hmm.
In the military, they say that no good plan survives first contact with the enemy. And I think that's the same in software development sometimes, is you have a pretty good plan and then you get into the project and then you have to make compromises and say, well, this didn't go according to plan, or hey, the timetables changed here, or oh, we thought we were going to be able to do it this way, but something came up and we're going to have to change course. And so you want to periodically review your plans and make changes as those things happen.
So I want to put you on the spot here. So you've been a director, you've been a manager, you've obviously been a developer yourself. So could you tell me a story and then assign a grade to it? Whether it's a bogey or an eagle or somewhere in between from your experience?
Without naming a particular name, I worked for a large company, and they were really big into agile, and agile with a capital A, and to the point where they tried to plan maybe a little over planning of things, but they had 8-week sprints. And so you can imagine trying to plan ahead for everything we're going to do
for 8 weeks. Yeah, sure.
And
I have a tough time sitting down on Monday morning figuring out what's going to happen Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So, and that's just for me, never mind for a team. So.
Yep. And so it was really hard as you tried to plan, okay, this is what we want to have happen over the next 8 weeks. It was really hard to have that, not get totally messed up by, you get two or 3 weeks into that sprint and realize, oh, hey, what we thought was going to work is not going to work, or this other, requirement was imposed upon us. And we really suffered because we couldn't kind of adjust things on the fly to the situation on the ground as we.
Yeah.
as that
makes
happened.
sense.
So that was
Mhm.
probably a double bogey. Another situation I was in, I was working for a company and we acquired another company. And as part of that acquisition, we knew we were going to have to integrate some teams fairly quickly.
Right.
And so by planning ahead and actually sitting down with the teams of the company we were acquiring and saying, hey, because of this and this, we're going to have to integrate your team fairly quickly. Ordinarily, we would like to take a little slower approach to this, but these are the constraints we have. Let's plan ahead for how are we going to get these teams communicating, working on the same sheet of music, that sort of thing. By planning ahead a little bit, we were actually able to make that work really, really smoothly.
Nice. That's good to hear. Acquisitions and mergers are tough.
Mergers and acquisitions, as they call them, are very tough, and I've had my fair share of those. So that's always good when they go smoothly.
Nice. Good.
All right, let's move on to number 3, and that's on focusing on your priorities. So I like to ask my software developers this question: how do you start your day? Do you sit down and start writing code first, or do you check your email first? Do you read the news? How do you start your day? How do you just kick off that day? If you're kicking off a new software development project, what code do you write first?
Yeah.
Do you write the command line parser for the command line options? Do you write the tests first? Do you write the easy part first? How do you do that?
Okay.
Because we all know that there are things that in software development, just in life, there are things that are urgent and there are things that are not urgent.
Right.
There are things that are important and there are things that are not important. And Stephen Covey in his book actually breaks these up into 4 quadrants. You can think of like a spreadsheet with 2 columns and 2 rows, the columns being urgent and not urgent, and the rows being important.
Oh yeah, this is
important.
with time management too, right?
Yeah, and it's with time management as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so he calls these quadrants 1, 2, 3, and 4. So quadrant 1 is urgent and important. Quadrant 2 is important but not urgent. Quadrant 3 is urgent but not important. And quadrant 4 is neither urgent nor important.
Right.
Now that's interesting, and trying to lump the activities you do into one of these quadrants is interesting. But this next graphic, for those who are on the video, I actually found more interesting, because it tells you what to do with the things that are in each of these quadrants. For the things that are in that quadrant 1, the things that are urgent and important, those are things that are kind of crises. Those are pressing problems. Those are the things you want to manage. You want to hopefully get out of daily firefighting mode. Hopefully not everything is on fire, but those important and urgent things. You have to manage those. You have to deal with those. The things in quadrant 2, the things that are important but not urgent, those are kind of your strategic planning, your critical thinking, making sure you're considering the bigger picture sorts of things. Those are the things that are going to help you focus on the future.
Is this where people should be starting their day, on quadrant 2? Important and not urgent?
I find it's helpful for me.
Yeah, that's what I think for myself too. Yeah, when I prioritize my day, it starts at 2.
Right. And I've also found that if I'm procrastinating, it's because I'm putting the things in quadrant 3 ahead of quadrant 2. The things that are urgent but not important.
Yeah, right.
It's urgent that I respond to that email that could really wait until later in the day, because it just popped into my inbox.
Yeah, but if you want to be busy for 20 minutes, feeling like you're doing something, you could definitely do that, which is a tough game.
Yep.
Yeah.
So quadrant 3 are really the things you want to avoid wherever possible. I mean, yes, you need to do them. They are urgent, but they're not necessarily that important. So
right.
Whenever possible, don't let those get in the way of your quadrant 2, and definitely not your quadrant 1 things. And then quadrant 4 are just the trivial, wasteful things that we want to try to limit. And these just they're for entertainment. They're there for hey, I'll play that game for 5 minutes between while I'm waiting for the code to compile, but could be doing other things type.
Right.
So I find this chart really helps me to just know what to do with those things. And so
now, would you use a chart when you're managing managers like this, as well as when you're managing developers?
Sure. I'll often ask people. I'll say, hey, you've told me that you're spending a lot of time in such and such task. Is that a quadrant 1 thing, or is that a quadrant 2 thing, or is that a
okay.
And then they'll say, oh yeah, I guess I am spending more time in quadrant 3 than I need to, and I really should be focused on quadrant 2 when I can, and in quadrant 1 when those things come up, obviously. So being able to prioritize. The other thing that this comes in handy for, not only with time management, is incident management. If you've got let's say you've got an outage with your software project,
Right.
and you're scrambling to try to fix the problem. Using some of this to say, hey, communication with the team is important. It's not necessarily urgent, but it's important. How are we going to structure incident management so that maybe we have somebody on our team whose job it is to communicate with the other, senior leaders in the company about where we are in fixing this problem, so that the person fixing the problem can focus on fixing the problem and isn't having to both do triage and communicate.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
So figuring out what's urgent, what's important, and then building your incident response team and incident response plans around that is often helpful.
Yeah, we call it the keeping the lights on activities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Opposed to the innovation, which was probably 2 versus 3, and how you can get more time into 2 and away from 3. Yeah,
exactly. So as far as scoring there, if you're mindlessly checking email, news, all your RSS feeds, etc., to avoid work, but telling people how busy you are, then you're probably stuck in quadrant 3 there, and you should give yourself 2 points. If you're constantly firefighting so that everything is quadrant 1 and nothing in quadrant 2 ever gets done, then that's unhealthy as well. So give yourself 1 point. If you try to rotate between all 4 quadrants during any given day, I would say that's probably par for the course. If you can spend an hour a day on quadrant 2, I'd give yourself a point. That's hard to do.
Yeah.
Like you said, Shay, it's often easier to do that at the beginning of the day.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah, get the hard things done first.
Yep. And
if things that are hard to find time for.
And if you can proactively block off time in your calendar specifically for your quadrant 2 items, and keep those quadrant 3 items from injecting themselves into that time.
Yeah.
That's worth 2 points below par, because that's very, very important, is to proactively block off time to focus on the not just, hey, what's pressing right now, but how am I developing myself as a developer, or how am I helping my team to progress and develop.
Right.
So that's that one. Number 4 is that it's not a zero-sum game. So we often know that many games, including like board games like checkers or chess, the idea of a zero-sum game, meaning if one person wins, the other person loses, or if one person gets 3 points, then the other person gets negative 3 points, that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But generally, life is not a zero-sum game. Software development tends not to be a zero-sum game. And so you want to look for those kind of win-win situations, or even if you can find them, win-win-win situations, meaning you win, the other person wins, but the customer or the user of the software wins as well.
Right.
It's often a little more hard, a little harder. It's a little more work. It's a little more effort. It's a little more strain to figure out how you can do these things such that that everybody wins, or most everybody wins, and it's not a zero-sum game. I remember giving this presentation a few years ago at a conference, and the morning of the presentation, I came across a tweet that said software development is 20% code and 80% people. And some people interpreted that the wrong way, saying, oh, you don't need to learn how to code. It's not about the code. And I don't want to go down there, but there is a lot to software development that's not just coding. It's communication with other people. It's setting expectations, or if you want to call it a contract between, hey, my library is going to take in this input and give you this output, and these are the things where it's going to throw an exception, those sorts of things.
Right.
So there's a lot of non-code aspects to software development. There's project planning, there's there's testing, there's QA, there's sustainability, there's lots of other pieces besides just sitting down and cranking out code.
Right.
So keep that in mind. The other quote that I like says that if you're crossing the country in a covered wagon, it's better to have 4 strong oxen than 100 chickens. Chickens are
Sure.
okay, but we haven't been able to figure out how to make them work together yet.
Yeah.
And so finding strong team members that are willing to work together and pull together in the same direction, rather than just running off as 100 chickens in different directions, is part of that. And without spending too much time into going into how do you build build teams that pull together and work together well. That's the basic idea there.
Yep.
A lot of this, as being a manager of software developers, is about how you frame success and failure as well. So for example, just on the scoring side of things, if your success as a manager means failure for people on your team or failure for other teams, excuse me, then that's +2 points to your score. That's not good. If you take all the credit for the successes but none of the blame for failures, you're not a very good manager. I think we've all had good managers. We probably all had bad managers. I have one in particular that was always quick to take success for anything that.
It's good to have
he
had
did.
both. Yeah,
Yep,
but
it is.
yeah, I understand.
But it's he would never take any blame for any of the failures. He'd always pass on the blame onto the individuals beneath him. And I think you got to take both. If you're taking credit for the success, you got to take blame for the failure. If you share credit for the success with your team, that's probably about par. I think most software developers and software development managers are good at sharing credit. One thing I find is important is spending as much time looking forward in personal development as you do looking backwards with performance reviews. One of the companies I worked for was really good about saying, hey, every 6 months we're going to have a we're going to have a performance review and see how you've done over the past 6 months.
Okay.
But also every 6 months, we're also going to, on kind of the odd quarters, we're going to do a review of personal development. Where do you want to go looking forward?
Oh, nice. So something happens every quarter.
Right. So you had something every quarter, but it's alternating between looking forward with personal development and where are you in your career and what skills do you need to learn to move forward, those sorts of things. And then, the alternating one is looking backwards in performance review. How have you done in the past 6 months? That sort of thing. And so
you really do have to do both.
Yeah.
If you're going to try to keep people, especially a software developer, you need to make sure they're learning.
There's nothing more frustrating to a software developer to find out, to have an annual review once a year that's looking backwards and say, over the past year, you really didn't do so hot. And he's like, well, why didn't you give me feedback,
Exactly.
to find out a year later that you haven't been doing as well as you thought you were and haven't been getting that feedback in a timely fashion is not cool. So,
there's probably nothing that's more discouraging, or very few things that are more discouraging than being told your last year was bad.
Indeed.
It's more generalized than what it should be.
Indeed. So
yeah.
And then I put take 2 points off your score if you measure each team member against their own personal yardstick rather than against each other. It's really easy as a software manager to say, well, Joe is faster than Frank, but Jill is a better communicator than Sue. Those sorts of things. But it's harder to measure each person against their own personal yardstick rather than comparing one person to another, because we're all individuals. We all have our different strengths and talents and different ways of approaching things. And so it's not always completely fair to compare one person against another person. So I find really good software development managers measure each person based on their own personal yardstick.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It takes a team, right? And if everyone was the same, you wouldn't create beautiful things. It'd all just be the same.
Exactly. It's a good thing that not everybody's just like me, or it'd be a really, really boring world.
I would say the same thing. If everyone was like me, it'd be very boring as well.
And that kind of leads into habit number 5, which I call "It's not about you." And I think this one is best exemplified by a meme that my wife used to have on the desktop of her computer. It's Captain Kirk from Star Trek, and it has these big words. It says, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of how awesome."
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I think we see some of this in the software development field. We all hear about these 10 times engineers or 100x engineers, that are just rock stars that come in and can walk on water and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I find too many times they sometimes just come in and wreak havoc on a team, and they're there for a short amount of time and then they wander off because they don't have a good sense of listening to a team and understanding what's going on with the team before they jump in and say, oh, I know the answer to this, let's go do this. Or as the way Stephen Covey put it is, seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Yep.
So taking the time to listen and understand and what are the problems that the team is facing, what has already been tried, is there particular reasons we wouldn't try this particular approach, understanding first before kind of imposing your own worldview on things is very, very helpful. I can't tell you how many times I've seen software developers that were really good and loved what they do, but they left because they got a new manager that came in and didn't understand their role, didn't understand what they were doing. just kind of impose their will on things, and it caused really good software developers to say, hey, this guy doesn't know what I'm doing, what I do doesn't value my work here. I'm going to go for greener pastures.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's been like a reoccurring thing in conversations like this that I've heard, like, hey, there's people who might ace like the technical side of an interview, but then do you want to spend like a day with them? Like, I don't know. And like the more important part, is like kind of the soft skills often, even though it's a technical job, because you do need it all come together.
Especially when you're in the trenches. If there's, if you're up against deadlines or outages or those sorts of things, that's where you're really going to find out that hey, I can't get along with this guy, and I don't want to spend time with him. And I say guy, it could be guy or gal, but yeah. So the way I've kind of scored this one is,
I want to hear how you score this one.
This +2 if you're demanding that the team does it your way before they can even explain the context of the problem. +1 is giving unsolicited advice about things you don't really understand. I think par for the course is having a good balance of give and take on giving feedback and giving advice. I go one under par if you take the time to fully understand the problem before making a decision or imposing your will on a particular project. But I think even more important than that, you can get -2 points. Help the team find the right solution by asking probing questions.
Okay.
This is something I've learned as a software manager. It's hard to do, but sometimes rather than just saying, hey, have you thought about this? Ask the questions and help your team come to that realization on their own by thinking about it, so that the next time, you don't have to give them the answer again. They're kind of programmed to think through those things and ask those probing questions. It's harder as a manager to ask questions and then wait for the silence and let them think through those things. But that's how you grow better software developers.
I like that.
And sometimes we're afraid of the negative space. We're afraid of that silence. And I think sometimes it's very, very healthy to ask a probing question and say, I don't need an answer right now. Let's continue this conversation tomorrow or later this week or next week, and then come back and take a look at this and give some space for the developer to go solve the problem. I mean, as software developers, we become really good at problem solving, sometimes to a fault. And sometimes we need a little space to work through the problem and figure it out and optimize for that.
Right. Hits bucket 2, right? Important, not urgent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So sometimes probing questions are the good thing there.
Yep.
All right, on to habit number 6. This I call play your game, not someone else's. With software development, the best analogy I can do for this is software libraries. Do you use somebody else's software library as you're building out a program to kind of take care of some of the heavy lifting underneath the covers, or do you build your own? Do you use an existing framework? Do you build your own framework? It's kind of the old adage: do you build or do you buy? Or in some cases, can you leverage some open source software to done the way you do? And I've seen it work well in on kind of both sides.
Right, that's what I'm thinking. So you're not saying one's right or one's wrong.
I'm not saying always build. I'm not saying always buy. I'm not saying always leverage open source.
You're just trying to understand them as a developer.
Right. I'm saying that those are all tools in your toolbox, and you have to know when to use the right tool for the right thing. There's obviously pros and cons, both in terms of immediate cost, and kind of CapEx cost, so to speak.
Right.
There's terms of kind of long-term operational cost and maintainability. If you're leveraging an open source library, there's obviously some long-term, kind of total cost of ownership you have to think about, is what does it take to keep up with changes in that library? If there are security updates to that library, how quickly can we update our software to use a newer version of that library?
Yeah, the maintenance and support side.
The maintenance and support side of thing. And so you have to keep track of all of that stuff and then make a decision. One of the analogies I like is that building software is kind of like buying a pony. If my daughter came to me and said, Dad, I really want you to buy me a pony, will you please buy me a pony? It's not just about what does the pony cost, right? The first thing you're going to think about is, okay, where's that pony going to live, and how much is it going to cost to feed it? Who's going to feed it? Who's going to take care of it? Who's going to take it to the vet? And when you go off to college, who's going to, what's going to happen with the pony? You're thinking about, that total cost of ownership.
Right.
The same thing with software development. You should be thinking not just, hey, what does it take in terms of man hours to go write this piece of software, but what does it take to do the upkeep? What does it take to keep up with security updates and keep it keep it sustainable? And is it worth putting more effort during the software development process to make it more sustainable over the long haul? And how do you do that? Is it documentation? Is it is it the way that it's coded? Is it the language you choose? Those sorts of things.
Right.
So think about that. Talk about what does success look like? What are the metrics that you're actually going to be using to measure the success of your software project? How do you know if you've hit a bullseye or not? Those are things that you want to take care of.
Yeah, it's free like a puppy's free is when we hear.
It's free like it's a puppy. No such thing as a free puppy, right?
Yeah, I'm learning that right now, actually. But yeah, it is fun.
Yep. So as far as scoring goes, I'm going to give you +2 points if you spend more time on your tooling than you do on actually producing useful output. I think we've all found software developers that really love their craft, but to the point where they spend more time building the frameworks and the jigs and the kind of the infrastructure around their code and never actually get around to writing the code that they're trying to write. +1 if you work on things that are fun and interesting, but not necessarily the most productive. I think some people, software developers, just love what they do, but they love playing around with something new that they're learning. And so they try to say, hey, I'm going to try to use this particular thing that I'm learning about in this code that I'm writing, not because it's the most efficient way to get that code written, but because it's fun and exciting and new and shiny object syndrome. So 0 points if you alternate between useful output and improving internal systems. I think that's kind of par for the course as a software developer. You can't just always be writing new code and not fixing up old code. So I think that's kind of par for the course. I'll give you 1 point under if you do appropriate measurements that are agreed upon before starting a new project. So you can say, hey, I expect the code to be done by XYZ date, and this is what the feature set that it should have, and then negotiate on, hey, it may not have this feature, but it will have this feature, and we'll add this feature in version 2 or version 1.2 or those sorts of things. 2 points below par if measurements are understood to be that. It's just a measurement, it's not the end goal. There's a law, I think it's called Godwin's law, if I remember correctly. No, it's not Godwin's law, Conway's law. No, that's not right either. Anyway, there's one of these computer science laws, and I'll get it, and I've completely forgotten it. But basically says that when the measurement ends up being the target, it ceases to be a good measurement.
Okay.
And basically, if your metrics are such that the goal is to hit a particular metric, well, people are going to game the system, and it ceases to be a good measurement. If you're being judged on, hey, how many lines of code did you write this week? Well, then you're going to write more lines of code at the expense of other things. If the metric is, how many new software projects did we launch this year? Well, you're going to launch new software projects at the expense of sustainability.
So when I look at these 5, it's pretty interesting because I think of what a developer is doing every single day, who maybe just has an engineering background versus, you got your MBA, right? There's a reason why developers are doing what they're doing, and often ends up tying back to the organization doing well. And organization doing well means that they, hit revenue targets or something like that, right?
Sure.
Ultimately. And what we're seeing, if you compare it to 10, 15 years ago, is that it's easier to quantify the value of a developer today than there is, back when, you were talking about those buckets. And I think I used keeping the lights on activities versus being productive. And we're seeing a shift, right? A lot of things are going SaaS from being on-prem. And therefore, once it's SaaS, you can kind of put a dollar amount into what the time is to, whatever, spin up something and turn something on the cloud or whatever. But how do you help a developer transition from, +2 or +1 to being like, hey, let's discover the why as to why you're spending your time doing this. Can we help you, I guess, quantify, to the business, the value that you're bringing on an hourly basis and help improve, that value that you're bringing? How do you help someone like that?
Sure.
Hopefully you understand what I'm saying.
Sure. I think there's a couple of ways to do that. I think first of all, don't be afraid to share business, the kind of the business stats with your software developers.
Right.
I know that most software developers are not that interested in the profit and loss statement, and what was your gross margin this month and those sorts of things, but still sharing those with them, so at least they know how the business is doing, and particularly on their team, if there's line items specific to their team on that are quantifiable as far as how's the business doing. Oftentimes those are helpful for them to start thinking about, oh, it's not just about me getting X, Y, or Z done, but it's how does that contribute to the overall organization. Some of the best CEOs I've worked for have taken the time to help people who weren't that interested in the business learn more about the business.
Right, that's crucial.
The more interested you are in how the business is doing, the more you're going to kind of self-police and self-direct your interests towards making things work better.
Beautifully, that was very well said. Yeah. Okay, so is that something that's like in the culture of the business, or is that as an individual manager you need to do that?
I think it's absolutely in the culture of the business. Some businesses are really good at doing that, some aren't, but that's certainly something that can be taught and shared. And it's not, if your company isn't doing it now, it doesn't mean they can't pick up that skill. It's just like any other skill. It can be learned and taught and shared.
Right. Because I think ultimately a lot of developers would be interested in learning that, and it would change how they're bucketizing between 1, 2, 3, and 4, and how that would be relayed to someone like a CEO if they care or not. Right.
The other thing that I want to mention is that I think it's really, really important to be honest with your software developers and let them know that you understand as their manager that not every hour is worth the same, that you might spend 7, 8 hours pounding your head against a problem and it's not making very much progress, and then you spend 15 minutes the next day and it's solved, and you're moving.
Well, you're talking to a sales rep right now. You know how many hours I spent pounding my head against the wall, and then all of a sudden a 5-minute phone call. I'm like, oh, it's a great week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so not all software development time is valued equally. And then the other thing to just be honest and open about is that oftentimes software developers are charting new territory.
Yeah,
they're pioneers cutting across the plains sometimes for the first time, and
it's awesome. Yeah,
it's really hard it's awesome, but it's also really hard to plan for. It's
nice you don't even know what good looks like, right? Like, how are you supposed to tell them?
It's nice to say, oh, I think it's probably going to take me 5 or 6 hours to solve this particular problem, but it's uncharted territory. It might take 3 minutes. It might take 15 hours. And so just understanding that and letting your software developers know that you understand that, but you're still going to try to help them get better at estimating, what things are going to take, and with the understanding that it's a fluid world. It's not carved in stone. I think that's also helpful as well.
Hey, we're not all that different, it seems like, huh?
Oh, we like to curse the other side, but
yeah, of course, that's fair.
All right, moving on to habit number 7. This is one I call shuhari, which comes from Japanese martial arts, and it basically boils down to obey the rule, break the rule, and then be the rule. And the basic idea is when you're starting out learning something new, you should obey that rule. You should obey it with kind of perfectness until you know that rule by heart. And only once you completely understand it and you completely know it by heart and know all the ins and outs of it, then you break the rule. Not to be rebellious, but to see, okay, how does this work? If I don't do this piece, or if I don't do that piece, how does that change things? And then only after you've understood that do you kind of be the rule or live the rule.
Where'd you come up with this?
This I got out of actually some reading I was doing on design systems. I'm not a designer. I have terrible design sense. If you ask me to build the front end for a web system, I would gladly pass that off to somebody else and work on the back end. I mean, I have no design sense whatsoever. But in trying to become a better designer, mostly around some of the photography stuff I do as a hobby, I read an article in a design magazine about kind of design thinking and how to think, how to improve your thinking game as you're building software. And this particular thing talked about that the Shuhari method of really, obeying the rule until you understand it perfectly, then go break the rule to understand
Mm.
what, the kind of the context around that rule, and then be the rule or live the rule. As a way, so they talked about apprentice painters, that oftentimes they would, as someone is learning to paint, especially in an art school, that they're like, okay, you must obey these rules as far as color and composition and these sorts of things. And only after you've done that for a year can you go break the rule and be a little more avant-garde in your art. And once you've done that and kind of figured out where you fit in the world, can you really live the rules that you've learned.
So when is it be the rule, it's like define the rule?
It's more either define the rule or just embody
Okay.
through the way that you practice the art.
Yeah, it's what it's not a tough thing to follow because it's what you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's what you're going to do anyway.
Another great thing that I learned is there's a professor by the name of Rhett Allain who wrote a great article in Wired magazine about the learning process and how sometimes we get more experienced in our careers and we forget how to learn. We forget how to be a beginner. We forget that struggle that you have to go through sometimes to learn a new concept. And he says, you wouldn't expect to if you were bodybuilding, you wouldn't expect to just instantly grow muscles without going to the gym and sweating and exercising and putting a lot of effort and exertion into building up your muscles. And he says the same is for learning. He says confusion is the sweat of learning. Sometimes you need to go have that confusion. You need to dive into a project and say, I don't know how I'm going to make this work, and then just work through the process and keep exercising and keep pushing until you build those software development muscles and learn that new concept. So I like to give my, when I'm managing software developers, I like to give my team members, give them some space and some time to go, work through that confusion, work through that exercise, work through that learning process. And as a learner myself, I like to throw myself into things that I'm not totally familiar with, so that
that's how you get creative too, right? And that's how you find new ways to solve problems. Maybe better ways.
I mean, some of the greatest branches in my career have been I threw myself into a project that I knew nothing about and became an expert in it, and then wrote a book on it and showed other people how to do it and that sort of thing. So don't be afraid to be confused. Don't be afraid to have to struggle a little bit through some learning, because that's really how you grow and develop. And then one last quote that I just really love about this whole concept of shuhari or kind of sharpening the saw or being better at your craft, however you want to phrase that, comes from Thomas Jefferson. He says, in matters of principle, stand like a rock. In matters of taste, swim with the current. I thought that was a good way of kind of summing up some of that. So let's go on to the scoring here quickly on habit number 7. I give you +2 if you're too experienced to learn something new. If you figure I understand that I'm at the peak of my game now, I don't need to go learn something new. +1 for being what I call a lazy learner. I'll learn if I have to, I guess. I'm perfectly fine with doing things the way I'm doing things. I don't need to sharpen the saw. I think par is periodically pushing yourself in new areas, but not making it at a constant effort. Maybe once or twice a year you try to pick up a new skill or a new programming language or a new way of doing things, but not really pushing yourself hard on that. We'll go one below if you make a constant effort to hone your skills, improve your craft, and 2 below if you actually create a personal progress or learning plan and schedule time to improve yourself. How many of us actually block out time on our calendars to say, hey, I'm going to learn something new?
Right.
Too many times we leave that to I'll find time sometime. Maybe I'll read an article over the weekend and try to learn something new. Or we just say, I'm not going to learn anything new unless I'm forced to by being thrown into a situation where I have to learn something new.
So let's say you're +2. You're too experienced to learn something new. Does that mean you need to get on a new project?
Either a new project or maybe a completely different company and a completely different industry and shake things up a little bit. I've certainly done that with my career, sometimes by choice, sometimes not by choice,
Yeah.
but been forced to jump in and dive into the deep end and tread water for a little while until you learn how to swim, and then figure things out. And you know sometimes that's a good impetus. Sometimes in my career I've just like, I'm growing bored with what I'm doing. If I'm doing the same thing, if I'm sitting in a cubicle doing the same thing this year that I was doing last year, that I'm not the kind of person who can stand that. I want to be learning something new or doing something interesting. So I'll oftentimes say, "No, I'm bored with that. Let's move on to something else." And sometimes you're able to find a new project or a new team within the same organization you're working for. Sometimes it means taking a risk and going out and looking for a job in another company or another industry.
So when you were at, we named, I don't want to bring up company names too much, but
Sure.
you worked for like 3 large organizations that are very well known, that have high talent when it comes to engineers, right?
Right.
What did a company that's doing well to avoid situation of a double bogey, having people that are too experienced to learn something new, how did they proactively try to keep people and make sure that they are learning new things?
So the one thing I shared earlier about having a personal development review,
Yeah.
every other quarter,
Right.
every other quarter, as well as performance review. I think that was one of the things that was actually something I picked up from Capital One while I was there, and they were very, very good about that. And so you knew as an engineer there that not only were you being judged on your performance, how you did over the past 6 months, but you also knew that they were interested in your career growth and in your personal development and your career development. That was good. Other companies are really good about making sure that there is not only money for training available, but time available for training. If you want to go pick up a new skill, or go to a conference or go to a training class to pick up a new skill.
So they let them use the 9 to 5. It's not 9 to 5, it's whatever you're working, but during our Monday through Friday 9 to 5, the employer is saying, hey, we're going to let you go learn. Yeah.
And part of that is just a mentality. There are certainly companies out there who view their employees as resources, as human resources to be mined. There are other companies who view those as capital, human capital that's to be invested in and help to stay relevant and current. And so some of that is just a company mindset of, do I view my employees as hey, I hired him to do job A and he's going to do job A until he quits or retires, or do they view, hey, we hired, Jill to do job B, but we know that Jill is going to advance in her career, and sometime down the road, Jill is going to take over her manager's job, and her manager fire or move up the chain, or that sort of thing.
Right.
And so I think that's the number one thing is having plans for a person's progress and growth within the organization. I think the second thing is being willing to promote from within. Sometimes that's really hard. I know I've certainly been a manager of a team and decided to move on to a different role. And I was told we would prefer if you pulled somebody from your team to take over your role rather than replacing from the outside. And I looked at everybody on my team and I thought, well, there's a few that have this part of the job, but not this part of the job. But no, let's see if we can take them and mentor them, and maybe take a little longer to do the transition to make it easier for them to transition into that role. But I think being willing to hire from within, even if the person doesn't have 100% of the requirements for the job, I think that's healthy and helpful as well.
Well, they certainly probably have the trust of the people that they're working with, and there would be some loyalty that would be gained in a world of technology where loyalty is hard to come by, because there's a lot of things going on.
Loyalty is hard to come by. I mean, as software developers, we tend to kind of see through the marketing shine that sometimes gets put on things. We're good at saying, no, I don't want to talk to the marketing droid. Let me talk to the engineer. Let's get to the nuts and bolts of things. And so, loyalty is hard to come by, but software engineers see when the people around them are being promoted from within and they're being invested in. I mean, software developers see that and they respect that. And maybe that's the word that really sums that up, is finding ways to earn the respect of your software developers.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up Capital One, because I'm right in DC, and seemingly a lot of folks have spent some time at Capital One, and there's probably a reason why, because they develop people, right?
Yeah.
And they take care of people. So interesting to hear. Indeed. That when we look at how to avoid a double bogey, that you brought up a Capital One example. Makes sense to me.
Very good. And now I've gone through the 7 habits here, but
oh, there's more. Okay.
In traditional, software, presentations, but wait, there's more. I like to throw an 8th one in there, and that is to inspire, teach, and mentor. I think it's important for each of us to as we learn things, as we figure out how this whole world works, to take a minute every once in a while and help teach the next generation and the up and coming people some of those same things. This is one of the things I absolutely love about the open source software development communities that I'm a part of, is that there's a huge environment there for teaching and mentoring and inspiring others, and kind of standing on the shoulders of giants. I wouldn't be where I am in my career if I hadn't had some great mentors and some great teachers and been able to stand on the shoulders of other giants who came before me. And I hope to have other people standing on my shoulders as well.
Well, you're definitely working towards that right now. Appreciate you having you on. I do want to give you an opportunity to talk about Inspire. And I'm going to ask a question if we're wrapped up with the, we'll call it, I guess, the 8 habits of highly effective developers, or 7+1 at least. You've been an evangelist in the open source community for a long time. You've been, around computers since the age of 6. So you have a unique view of what's going on with technology right now, and just taking a step back and looking at technology as a whole. Like, what excites you most about the future?
Oh boy. I think connectivity is something that really interests me, especially video these days. I spent much of my career in the voice over IP industry and the telecommunications industry with voice over IP and telephone systems. But really over the last couple of years, how much more video is tied into that, and being able to see each other. I think there's kind of nonverbal cues that we get from video that can be helpful. It's also more psychologically taxing to be on video calls all day long as well. Sure. So I think there's pros and cons there, but just the video for better collaboration and better communication is interesting to me. At the same time, there's been a huge uptick in kind of prosumer level video hardware that's become available at a reasonable price. Where on my desk I have a 4-port video HDMI mixer that can scale, has scalers, and can do picture-in-picture, and can do graphics and lower thirds and those sorts of things, and very inexpensive, and just amazing that level of hardware 3 or 4 years ago would have been thousands and thousands of dollars, and now it's hundreds of dollars and that sort of thing. And so really bringing kind of that level of sophistication down to the point where a guy with a laptop and a few $100s worth of equipment could have the equivalent of a TV studio of 5 years ago. Is really amazing, and kind of democratizes that technology. So that's really, really interesting to me. Another thing that fascinates me is, as the world generates more and more data, how do we find meaning in that data? How do we either structure that data or search that data, or or find ways of making it so that it's not just not usable, right? Bigger, but better. It's usable. Yeah. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, Delta Airlines had this ad campaign that only lasted for a few months, but it said, "We're not just building a bigger airline; we're building a better airline." And so I want to think about how are we building better data and not just bigger data,
right?
And so that's something that fascinates me.
Yeah, they kind of tie together both of those points, right? Because one, it's like access to everyone can have access to this machine that is capable of like crazy, compute and storage and all these things that when you first got your computer and you're 6 years old, you couldn't even possibly imagine that for the price point. Here we are having a podcast and a minimal amount of cost set up, and it's fantastic that everyone can come out and get on a platform and see things like that, whether anywhere in the world, right? And then you bring it to an enterprise level, and then you're talking about data, right? And we're talking about how you can actually store all the data, and you can cost rationalize keeping all of it, because the cost for a terabyte of storage isn't what it was even 10 years ago. It's a fraction of it. And same thing goes with compute and all that. So yeah, I mean, it's a crazy world. I thought when you brought up connectivity, you were going to talk about maybe 5G, but it's interesting that you went to video.
More about human connectivity than
yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. But yeah, it's an amazing time that we're in. So for the software engineers that are listening right now, is there any, as we go to wrap up here, Jared, is there any advice that you'd give software engineers who are looking to grow their career?
That's a good question. Other than the things I've already shared,
yeah, just anything you want to talk about before we wrap.
I guess the other thing is don't be afraid to where reasonable, play with things on the side. I mean, I know that many of our lives are all consuming, and especially with more people working remote and working asynchronously and maybe working not the traditional 9 to 5 that we find ourselves working from the time we check our phone first thing in the morning till we finally fall asleep exhausted in front of the TV evening. But just tinker with things on the side. So many of the things that I've found joy in my career have been something that I started playing with just as a side project to learn something new, and then develop that into something where I could either go use that as part of a job or create a role for myself in a company because I had those skills. And so again, just tinker, be be unafraid to go learn. And the way that we learn sometimes is to fail. Fail early, fail often, fail in a safe environment. So learn how to crawl, then learn how to walk, and then learn how to run.
Right. There's two real, I guess, takeaways that I'll bring up before we wrap here, and that just tied into one that I thought was interesting, which was, I guess, as an individual contributor, if you would, don't forget how to be a beginner. You just kind of brought that up, right? Tinker with things on the side. And then from a management standpoint, I think it was interesting because we talked about, seek first to understand before being understood. And then you took it a step further, and it's helped teams by asking probing questions and help them grow. From a management standpoint, I thought that was pretty powerful statement. So Jared, really appreciate the time this morning. Obviously, we want to bring value to our listeners here. It's largely folks in the DC area, but it can be anywhere in the world, like we were talking about. Folks in IT, right? The engineers, the software developers, and as we're chatting, if there's listeners out there that want to hear something specifically on the podcast, please let me know. You can send me a direct message. And then until next time, Jared, thank you again, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Shay.